Part 2 of fluids, water, electrolytes, acid, base, homeostasis. Okay, so we're starting from the electrolyte slide, all right? So you should be on that slide and you should know what an electrolyte is. An electrolyte is a compound that can conduct energy, okay, an electric current, and it can be a acid, a base, a salt, a protein, okay? It's important to understand that electrolytes can conduct energy because, think about it, if you have a deionized water, deionized meaning that you don't have any ions in there that can conduct electricity, you're not going to conduct anything, okay? It's just plain water, right? But once you start seeping yourself into that deionized water, the salt and the chloride and the everything else coming off of your skin is going to seep into the water, and that will make it have electrolytes in order to conduct energy. Okay, that's an example, by the way. You don't have to worry about any toaster bath, fucking deionized water examples being on the exam. What is it? Yeah, so it could be an acid, base, salt, or a protein. Electrolytes come in many different varieties. And they have 4 main functions, okay? Jesus. They control the osmosis of water, okay, between the body compartments, right? Salt retains water, maybe. Help maintain the acid-base balance required for normal cellular activities, okay, because you can't have too acidic of a environment and you can't have a too basic of an environment. You need a good medium. They carry an electrical current, of course, and this allows for the production of action potentials and graded potentials. From what we know, graded potentials summate, they get more and more and more and more, and they go and shoot as action potentials down an axon, okay? We're gonna get into how acidic environments and basic environments can change neural like shooting of things. And along with this electric current, this also controls the secretion of some hormones and neurotransmitters, right? I'm just phlegmed up today, Jesus. So, and then the 4th one, several ions act as cofactors needed for optimal activity of enzymes. So cofactors, they help enzymes. They are extra factors that will help activate, deactivate, increase, catalyze enzymes. Okay. Chart, another chart, okay? It is important to understand this chart, all right? Because the interstitial fluid, the extracellular fluid, the intracellular fluid all have different concentrations of electrolytes and ions, okay? So I would say focused on like the first 5 because those are what we're gonna be talking about the most. So you go ahead, take a picture of that or look at it in your packet. And, okay, we're done. Okay, so we have another chart. That's a big chart. You can't really read all of that. So these are electrolyte imbalances that can occur while in the blood. Okay, so there's a lot of things that go on. There's a lot of ions that are in the blood that you need to be able to, control, right? So we're just gonna go down the list and I'm going to name what happens if you have more or less of these ions, okay? And we're also gonna go into like why this might happen. Quick run through, it's gonna go very fast, so pay attention. 3, 2, 1, sodium, Na. If you have a deficiency in sodium, it is called let me get it up on here. Hypoatremia. Yes. So hypoatremia is maybe a decreased sodium intake. Maybe that's what causes it. An increased sodium loss via vomiting, diarrhea. You're shitting out more sodium than you should be. And on the flip side, you have hyperatremia, which means you have a higher sodium intake, higher sodium concentration in your blood volume or your fluid volume. Okay, let's see, chloride. So if you have a high amount of chloride, you have hyperchloremia. Easy. Hyperchloremia. High chloride-emia. High chloride intake. And that can be caused from dehydration, water loss, deprivation, excessive chloride intake, and like renal failure, like very bad renal failure. Like don't like do shit, but renal failure. And then on the flip side, yet again, you have hypochloremia, low chloride concentration. This can be caused due to excessive vomiting, dehydration, aldosterone deficiency. Keep that in mind. Aldosterone deficiency can cause hyperchloremia. Vomiting, overhydration, right? Because now your osmolarity is messed up. And that's basically what you should understand about that. Okay. For potassium. So if you have high potassium levels, you have hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia may be due to excessive intake of potassium. So you eat too many bananas, you have too much potassium in you. It also may be due to renal failure, aldosterone deficiency, injuries that involve the crushing of body parts. So if you fucking steamroll your leg, you might have hyperkalemia. There's something's probably wrong. And blood transfusions. Yet again, on the opposite end, hypokalemia, low potassium levels. Low potassium levels may indicate excessive loss of potassium due to vomiting, diarrhea, decreased potassium intake. You're not eating as much bananas. Hypothyroidism, kidney disease, and some therapy with diuretics. Maybe you're just losing some. Okay, so hypokalemia, potassium. Remember, the atomic symbol for potassium is K. So always remember that. Kalemia, K. There you go. All right, moving on. Calcium. Do you have hypercalcemia? Hypercalcemia may result from hypothyroidism, cancers, excessive vitamin D. You're taking too many vitamin D supplements, you might have hypercalcemia. You might have a little toxic substance levels of vitamin D in your liver. And yet again, hypocalcemia may be due to increased calcium loss. You don't have as much calcium. You're urinating it out. You're shitting it out. You're getting rid of all the calcium in you. So it might mess up your bones because your bones are made of mostly calcium, right? Reduced calcium intake, elevated levels of phosphate, or hypothyroidism. So hypoparathyroidism, all right, it's different. Hyperthyroidism, hypoparathyroidism, different. So your parathyroid glands are not working as well. So it's hypo. There you go. Okay. This is a long one. Hyperphosphatemia. All right, cool. So what's going to cause that? Usually occurs in the kidneys when the kidneys fail to excrete excess phosphate. So all that phosphate built up in your kidneys from all like the filtration and it's ATP, it's getting in all our, everything is just very concentrated in the kidneys. If it fails to excrete that, it's just sitting there and it might be reabsorbed and you might have too many phosphates in you. All right. This usually happens when you have a renal failure. That's why it's important that your renals don't fail, because if they fail, then you might have toxic levels of ions in your body. Yeah, and you have like excessive intake of phosphates, or your body cells die. That can cause an increase in phosphates. And once they die, they release those phosphates into the blood, okay? So then that's hyperphosphatemia. What about hypophosphatemia? Like everything else, It may occur through increased urinary excess, yeah. Decreased intestinal absorption, and increased, utilization. So basically, you're just keeping too much, you're getting rid of it all. So it's hypo now. So now you don't have enough phosphates. And you know, phosphates are really important, right? Because they connect to a lot of things. They help make ATP, all right? And you need energy. So think about it. If you have hypophosphatemia, you might have low energy levels because you don't have enough phosphates to connect with ADP in order to make ATP. So now you're low energy, okay? And last one, you guys are doing great. Magnesium. So what are we gonna do with that? Hypermagnesia, okay? Hypermagnesemia, yeah, magnesemia, I don't know. That occurs when renal failure or increased magnesium intake, and it also occurs with hypothyroidism and aldosterone deficiency. So we keep bringing up aldosterone, right? So why is aldosterone not working? It's not, you have a deficiency in aldosterone. What does aldosterone do? It retains ions and fluids, right? So if you have that aldosterone deficiency, that might mess it up. Let's see. Yeah, so you have too many of these like ions and aldosterone deficient. It's going to intake increasing levels, okay? Okay, on the flip side, hypomagnesia, magnesia, yeah. Okay, and you, like everything else in here, excessive loss, decrease in magnesium, malnutrition, diabetes, diuretic therapy, all can lead to hypomagnesia. Okay, cool. Read this chart, read it over. Don't worry about the signs and symptoms really, but do worry about what happens when there's a deficiency and when it's in excess, okay? Okay. All right, so that is basically all of electrolytes. You did the electrolytes. Now we are on to acids and bases. Cool. Acid and base balance. There's a balance between the acids and bases in the body. The AB balance is maintained by controlling the hydrogen and the OH concentration of fluids, mostly extracellular fluid. Especially extracellular fluid, okay? Normal pH of extracellular fluid is 7.35 to 7.45. So it's a little more alkaline than neutral water. Does that make sense? And this acid-base balance has 3 mechanisms for keeping homeostasis, okay? So what are these systems called? These systems, and I'm going in order, buffer systems, the kidney excretion and exhalation of CO2. We're going to get into how all of this changes. Okay, so starting with buffer systems. They are the fastest. They happen in fractions of a second. They're always constantly happening. Buffer systems temporarily bind hydrogen, removes excess from the solution, but not from the body. Thus, it is reversible. Okay, so we're gonna take that a little slower. So it binds hydrogen, all right? So hydrogen may be bound to maybe a weaker acid because weak acids still have hydrogen, right? And it also removes excess hydrogen. So if you have a lot of hydrogen that you don't need, that buffer system is gonna go ahead and it's going to convert it, okay? So this system converts strong acids to weak acids, and that do not alter pH as much. Same with bases. Not bases. Bases don't have that. Don't worry about that. Mostly acids, because acids always have that little hydrogen Usually the ones that we're talking about always have that hydrogen. So that's how you know to differentiate between the two. And that's just a regular buffer system. So there's multiple kinds of buffer systems, okay? There's actually 3. So we'll get back to the other 2 on how to maintain acid balance base after we go over the different types of buffer systems. So you have A, the protein buffer system, B, the carbonic acid or the bicarbonate buffer system, and then you have C, the phosphate buffer system, okay? So the protein buffer system is the most abundant buffer system in cells. Hemoglobin, which is common in what? Red blood cells, is usually present in these red blood cells. This is where this buffer system is going to usually happen. And what is also a key principal protein? Albumin. We mentioned albumin in, hemodynamics, along with a couple other chapters, but albumin is the principal protein. These proteins are composed of amino acids, of course, with 2 ends, all right? We have a carboxyl group, and we have an amino group. We're gonna go ahead, we're gonna turn the page, and I'm gonna show you what they look like, okay? So the carboxyl group, or the COOH, can release a hydrogen when pH is increased, so it is more alkaline, all right? And then that, since that hydrogen is leaving that carboxyl group, what will be made? It's just the COO left. So what's that? C2Os? CO2. So now CO2 is being made, okay? And on the other end, you have an amino group, the NH2. This can take on a hydrogen when pH falls. This forms a NH3 group. What is that? Nitric oxide? NH3? Mm-hmm. Nitric oxide. So amino, nitric oxide, carboxyl, CO2. And you could also remember carboxyl because carbon, right? So it's all just, it all makes sense in the head when you think about it. So remember carboxyl, CO2 because CC, right? And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna show you why these look like, right? So go ahead, you can look at this picture all you want. The carboxyl group, obviously, is going to be the group with these right over here. They're gonna get rid of that H, okay? Because they don't want that H anymore. So then that H is going to go swing around. It's going to give this to the amino group, and then you're going to get your N3, your nitric oxide, and then you're just going to be left with the CO2. CO2, yeah, Jesus, Anna. So they're basically sharing with one another. Okay, perfect, and that is the protein buffer system. That's it. That's all it is. It's just the giving and the taking of a hydrogen in order to slow down and turn it into a weaker acid, okay? So now we're on to B, the carbonic acid, AKA bicarbonate buffer system. And this one is so easy because we've actually learned it before. If you recognize this, you're already there. Look at that. So basically what this means, CO2 plus water turns into what? Bicarbonate. Yes, turns into bicarbonate, okay? Or H2CO3, yeah. It's basically the same thing. Or a carbonic acid. That's a carbonic acid. And then, because these are all weak, they are all reversible from one another. So that carbonic acid is going to go ahead and it can turn into a hydrogen, and it can also turn into a bicarbonate, all right? Bicarbonate, what did we know about bicarbonate? It is alkaline. The body uses it to alkalize things, okay? So now you have this bicarbonate and you have this hydrogen. So if you have a low pH and you need to alkalize this to bring it back up to that normal 7.35, you're going to use that bicarbonate to alkalize it, right? Okay. And because these are all reversible, you can go any way, right? It can turn back into CO2 and water to increase blood volume if need be, okay? Okay, cool. And then our last buffer system, the phosphate buffer system. This is the main buffer system that's important for regulating pH in red blood cells and in kidney tubular fluids, okay? So, and this uses the same mechanism, like a similar mechanism to the carbonic acid system. So we're going to introduce two new chemicals, a weak acid and a weak base, okay? So for our weak acid, you have dihydrogen phosphate, which is a weak acid. It's H2PO4, all right? H2 being the dihydrogen, the PO4 being the phosphate itself, okay? And then you have a monohydrogen phosphate, which is a weak base, okay? And that is HPO4. So it's just one hydrogen and the phosphate, okay? All right, perfect. So go ahead, look at that. So again, these are able to be broken up. So a weak acid, so our dihydrogen, mixes with, what is it, OH hydroxide? Hydroxide, OH?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm not dumb. See, this is what happens when you're in 121 and you have more things to worry about. So you have that mixes with the hydroxide, all right? And that is not a reversible process. So that turns it into a weak base and water. So when you have a buffer system, water is going to be a product of your original reactants, okay? It's going to make water when you're mixing a acid with the base, okay? Can't say the same for a weak base, for this one at least. So your weak bases love hydrogen. They take hydrogen, okay? Acids don't want their hydrogen anymore. They're reactive. They don't want that hydrogen. So that hydrogen that was given off by an acid is going to find our monohydrogen phosphate. It's going to connect, all right? So you have a extra hydrogen to your phosphate, and then that is going to make our weak acid of dihydrogen phosphate because you just added another hydrogen, okay? Okay, and that's the phosphate buffer system. Basically, it's just, all right, this one gives up an acid, and it gives it to this one. This one's the weak base, this one's the strong base. It's going to change, it'll minimize the effects of the pH, okay? Because a stronger acid will change the pH more than a weak one, okay? Okay, okay, so that's all the buffer systems, okay, of, the body, the main ones at least. So I don't know if there's any more, but those are the main ones. So now we're going back to how the acid-base balance occurs. Number 2 for the acid-base balance is the exhalation of CO2. From the respiration chapter, we know that if you have an increase in CO2, you have a more acidic blood, right? CO2 makes the blood acidic, okay? So the pH of the, bodily fluids may change due to respiration in like both rate and depth. This can occur every 1 to 3 minutes. So I'll give you some examples. If you have more respiration, so you're exhaling and inhaling more, but you're exhaling CO2 more. Would you have an increase in CO2 or would you have a decrease in CO2? A decrease in CO2. You're exhaling more, you're not retaining as much CO2 in your body. So because you have less CO2, you have less acidity in your blood, right? So that's going to increase your pH, okay? That's hyperventilation. Now moving on to the other side. You have a decrease in respiration. What's your CO2 gonna do? Because you're not exhaling it as much anymore. So what's happening? You're increasing your CO2. So now your blood is more acidic. So henceforth, your pH is going to lower. Acidity is below 7.35. alkalinity is above 7.45 in the body. And then, so thus, pH also affects respiration. If you have acidic blood, your brain is going to tell you to breathe out more because your blood is acidic. You need to get that CO2 out. You have a buildup. So if you hold your breath, you're building up CO2, right? Because you're not letting it go. You're not letting oxygen come in. You're not letting CO2 leave. Okay. So, to describe figure 27.9, that is a terrible picture, but to describe it in simple terms, you have a more acidic H concentration. So your blood is a little more acidic. You have a high hydrogen concentration. So once you have that high concentration of H in your body's like, that's too much. So what's being stimmed? Your receptors are going to be the chemoreceptors in the medulla and the aortic sinus, right? Because those are going to tell the brain whether your blood pH is okay. So once those chemoreceptors are activated and they report to the dorsal respiratory group in the medulla, that dorsal respiratory group is going to go ahead and send nerve impulses to the diaphragm, the main muscle for respiration, and that's going to tell you that you need to start respirating more. You need to start breathing more because this hydrogen is not working out, okay? So as less carbonic acid forms and fewer H are present, the blood pH will go up, so that reverses the acidity. So let's go ahead and we'll repeat that. So H2CO3, okay, that decreases, okay, which would mean that the H coming off of that, there's fewer H's now. So because you have fewer H's, your blood is less acidic, okay? H equals acidity in this stance, okay? All right, cool. I cannot properly explain this in a proper amount of time. It is a little, I think, out of our pay grade. So we didn't even really talk about it. Watch the video of SS explaining it if she does have it, because I didn't watch the whole video. So make sure you watch it. Kidney regulation of acid and base. The kidneys excrete, so they they flush it out, urinate it, hydrogen, and they reabsorb sodium to aid in maintaining pH, okay? Because remember, hydrogen, acidic. If you have too much hydrogen, your blood's acidic. You can't have that. Okay. That is mechanisms to maintain pH. You can go ahead and if you'd like, you could take a picture of that. Coolio. Okay, so now that we've gone over how the acid-base balance helps itself, neutralizes itself, we're going to go into the imbalances of the acid-base balance, okay? So like we said, a normal pH is somewhere from 7.35 to 7.45. So just slightly more alkaline, okay? So what happens if you're below 7.35? You have something called acidosis, right? The principal effect of having a pH below 7.35 decreases, it starts a depression of the CNS in synaptic transmission. So your CNS is slowing down. That's not good, okay? That's for more acidic environments. This is why it's important to not have too much of an acidic environment and not to have too much of an alkaline environment, because we're about to get into why it's not good to have a really good alkaline environment. Alkalosis is the term used to describe a pH over 7.45. Alkalosis causes overexcitability of the CNS through facilitation of synaptic transmission. If you are in an acidic environment, you are going to be slower, your breathing's gonna slow down, you're not gonna be thinking straight because your environment is way slower than it should be. And then if it's really basic, you're just gonna be fucking flying everywhere. You're going everywhere. Your body, every single microscopic like movement will only become more prevalent if the more alkaline your body is. Okay, because your CNS likes alkaline like pHs, right? But we can't have that, okay? We can't have an ultra alkaline pH. Because if you were to do every single thing that your brain told you to do, just randomly, you'd be going crazy, all right? If I were to point at you right now, my brain wouldn't be able to do that, okay? Because it's just going, okay? It's too overexcited, too many action potentials, too much stimulation, and that can lead to death, okay? Because your brain is just not working properly. Okay, last couple pages, we're going to be talking about a concept called compensation. Listen carefully to this because it's a bit weird to think about. Compensation is the physiological response to an acid-base imbalance, and it leads to the restoration of a normal blood pH. So this is basically your body saying like, okay, we need to restore it, the regular pH. There's two types of compensation: respiratory compensation and renal compensation, okay? These are caused by one or the other. So if respiratory compensation occurs, there is something wrong with your kidneys. And if renal constipation compensation is occurring, then there's something wrong with your respiratory centers and something wrong with your lungs, okay? So we're gonna get into that. Respiratory compensation. Used when an altered blood pH is due to metabolic causes, aka diarrhea, renal dysfunction, vomiting, okay? And now, because these metabolic and kidney dysfunctions are occurring, your kidneys aren't going to regulate your pH. Why would they do that? So what other form would your body take in order to regulate your pH? Your respiratory system. Hyperventilation or hypoventilation, remember hyper up, hypo down, can bring pH to within normal range in minutes, and within hours, compensation is complete. So respiratory compensation is quicker than renal compensation. That's important to remember because we're about to go into renal compensation. So respiratory compensation is in response to renal dysfunction. On the other hand, renal compensation is utilized when blood pH is altered due to respiratory causes. So pulmonary disease, brain injury that causes your lungs to fail, emphysema, edema, anything like that, pulmonary edemas. So now something's off because now your respiratory systems are down. So what's your renal gonna do? It's gonna try to compensate for that acid balance base, okay? The renal compensation is changes in the secretion of H and HCO by the kidney tubules, okay? So bicarbonate and hydrogen, all right? If you have very acidic blood, because your breathing's messed up, because you're not able to breathe properly due to emphysema, then bicarbonate is going to be retained more so than H, and it's the opposite for alkaline. If you have more hydrogen, if you have a more alkaline blood, your kidneys are going to retain more hydrogen. Okay, and this is the slower of the two compensations, okay? This may begin within minutes, but the maximum compensation will be not reached for days. So respiratory is more quick with its compensation than it is renal, because renal has to do this whole song and dance of making sure everything is balanced while also urinating and retaining and sending all this stuff. It's a lot harder. Okay, last page. take a look at that. We are going to get into acidosis and alkalosis of the different compensation like issues. Okay, so respiratory acidosis. You have an increased CO2, okay, which means that your pH is decreased because CO2 equals a more concentrated acidic blood. Why is this caused? Well, hypoventilation. Your breathing is not as good due to like emphysema or pulmonary edema or trauma or whatever you're not breathing as well, so you're not getting rid of all the CO2 that your body needs, that your body has in itself. Okay, so hypoventilation. So how is this compensated for? Renal compensation increases the excretion, so peeing out or getting rid of hydrogen because it's too acidic. This also increases the absorption of bicarbonate, which will increase the alkalinity. When the compensation is complete, the pH will be within the normal range, but CO2 will still be high, because even if your renals are still kind of helping the balance, CO2 is still pumping through your body, right? Because you're still hyperventilating, okay? All right, again, respiratory alkalosis, a decrease in CO2 concentration. You have an increased pH, so it's above 7.45. Why might this be caused? Hyperventilation due to an oxygen deficiency, pulmonary disease, and severe anxiety can also occur this. So if you have an anxiety attack, you might be hyperventilating, henceforth respiratory alkalosis. Okay, because you're taking in a lot of oxygen and you're trying to take as much oxygen as you can, so you have not a lot of CO2. So how is this also compensated? Renal compensation. Decreased excretion of hydrogen, so you're keeping in the hydrogen, you're retaining it because you want to acidize, I think that's the word for it, your blood because it's more alkaline now. But you also have bicarbonate, so what your kidney is going to do, they're going to decrease the reabsorption of bicarbonate, and same thing with acidosis. Even though this does help compensate for the pH, your PCO2 or your partially CO2 molecules, your concentration will still be low, right? Because you fixed the acid base problem, but you're still low in CO2. So you're probably weak because your muscles need that CO2. Or your muscles are making more CO2, but regardless. All right, two more. Metabolic acidosis, you have a decrease in bicarbonate, okay, and a decrease in pH, if no compensation. Yeah, so if you have no compensation, then you would have a decreased bicarbonate level and a decreased pH because it's acidosis, less bicarbonate, okay, more H, more hydrogen. Common causes: loss of bicarbonate due to diarrhea, acid, through ketosis, and renal dysfunction. So you're just not retaining any bicarbonate really. It's not being reabsorbed. So what's the compensation for this? Respiratory, hyperventilation. You're trying to take in as much as you can, so you're trying to get that CO2 in because that's going to increase the acidity, which increases the loss of CO2, right? So by hyperventilating, you're letting in more, okay? And you're getting out more. You're exhaling and inhaling quicker. If compensation is complete, pH will be within the normal range, but bicarbonate will still be low. So you would be still hyperventilating for quite a bit because you're trying to get more of that CO2 out, okay? Oh my God. And then last one, metabolic alkalosis. Increased bicarbonate, increased pH, you're alkaline, okay? And this would happen due to the loss of acid via vomiting, diarrhea, like all this other shit, renal dysfunction, again, excessive drugs of alkaline pH. Again, renal compensation, respiratory compensation. Hypoventilation, you're slowing down your breathing, okay? Slowing it down, not breathing as much, okay? Which slows the loss of CO2. So you're retaining more CO2 by slowing down your breathing, okay? If compensation is complete, the bicarbonate would still be high, but you would be in normal range, more normal. And that is it for this chapter. Apologies for it being so long, but it is important to make all these associations when you're learning this stuff because it A, helps you, B, helps me, all right? Have a good day.